Okay, moving on with chapter 13, we have photosynthesis. Now, photosynthesis, you have known this for a long time. You have known this possibly for the longest time, and I'm absolutely sure that almost everyone watching actually has this photosynthesis equation memorized and la-di-da. Okay, obviously. Now, the deal with this photosynthesis is that this is going to be a much more detailed version because this is your final specification when it comes to advanced A2 level biology. This photosynthesis is going to be the most detailed that you will ever find photosynthesis being. Okay, that does not necessarily mean that it's hard. It's not hard, it's detailed and it's tricky if you don't follow things in a proper order. Lucky for you, you don't have to worry. um, you know that this teaching method is going to follow that proper chronological order, so you will have no problems understanding it if you pay attention and follow through. Okay, so technically speaking, I will split this lesson into three, I'll call it 3 seconds. Let me mute my phone, give me a second. Okay, done. Right. So I'll split this lesson into 3 parts. First of all, we'll talk about the simple stuff. So for example, here we have 13.1, we're talking about the structure of a chloroplast, and then 13.2 will simply be about some photosynthetic pigments, what they are, what they absorb, and that stuff. And then we'll move on to a little bit of pigment chromatography. Those are the simplest things. And then when it comes to the middle of this lesson, that will be the most detailed part that you will have. So the stages of photosynthesis, that will be the most detailed part that you have to follow through, and that's going to be a little lengthy of a session, so that's coming up. And then finally, I'll talk about limiting factors. It's a very simple thing with a little bit of a small experimental part where we can measure the rate of photosynthesis. That's going to be important for your practical paper 5.2 P52. Okay, right, without any further ado and without me yapping for the next 15 minutes, we will get on to this, right? So the obvious color to use when it comes to a chloroplast would be green. I will try to pick a nice green. Okay, so this is the basic structure of a chloroplast. Chloroplasts are not rough, like very strictly oval shaped. I can return it to this, but I'm going to keep this oval just so that it's easier for you to follow through, like so. Okay, they're not strictly oval, just keep that in mind. And then I'm going to draw something inside. Guess what? Another oval. Okay, now we have 2 ovals. Right, let's get to naming. So we're talking about the structure of a chloroplast. So if you had not guessed already, that's your chloroplast. And now we'll be naming the structures inside. So starting off, we have this thing. If your observational skills are really good, you will notice that it's on the outside of the chloroplast. So that is typically known as the OM, standing for outer membrane. Outer membrane. Why does my U look like an X? Outer membrane, right. And then the IM, inner membrane. Now these membranes, they're not really specific for chloroplasts. You know, if you take mitochondria, if you take a cellular membrane, they have outer membranes and inner membranes. No big deal. And then this, you know, this space that we have between those things, we call it the intermembranal space. For simplicity, intermembrane space. Intermembrane space. Why is my handwriting going haywire? Never mind. All right. That's basically all this outer stuff. Now let's talk about what's inside. This is where things get interesting, and I might as well zoom in so that you get a better idea. Right, I'm gonna draw something like this. Okay. What is that? This is what you call a thylakoid. This is what you call a, here's the spellings, thylakoid. That's your thylakoid. This one thing. Now, in typical chloroplasts, in typical plants, these things are stacked like this. 1 thylakoid, 2 thylakoid, 3 thylakoid. something like this. Now, when they are stacked like this, we don't really call them thylakoids, but we specifically refer to all these as a granum. As a granum. We refer to all of these things as a granum. And chloroplasts have not one, not two, not three, but a number of granums. A number of granums. And we don't really call them granums. The plural form of granum is grana. Okay? I mean, you can remember grandma, I guess. So grana. And then these things are interconnected. They're not separate. They're interconnected like this by something like this. It's not strictly a straight line like this, but something like this. And that interconnection is what we call a lamella. That is a lamella right there. Okay, that's what you call a lamella. Those are the basic structures that you will find inside a chloroplast. Now, apart from that, you will find things like starch grains. So that's a starch grain. And you know, chloroplasts also have these. What are these? These are DNA and these tiny suckers. Do you call them? Those are ribosomes. Now you're in A levels, like I've said in AS levels. You cannot just say ribosomes. You have to be specific about the Swedberg units. So these are 70 Swedberg unital ribosomes. In other words, 70 S ribosomes. 70 S ribosomes. There you go. And there you have the basic structure of a typical plant-based chloroplast. And with this, I will also be giving you a small spoiler regarding photosynthesis. Now, don't try to put this too much into your head, but when it comes to photosynthesis, we have basically two stages. We typically refer to them as the light dependent stage. That's the first stage. So like the name suggests, it requires light energy. And then we also have you might have guessed it, light independent stage. We don't really want light for this stage. More detailed versions of this will be provided in the middle part of this lesson, so don't try to put this too much into your head. Not needed. All I'm trying to say is this light dependent stage is known for occurring in our thylakoids. Occurs in the thylakoid region. Thylakoids, if you may. I'm just going to place the S inside a bracket. Okay. The light dependent stage occurs in the thylakoids, and then the light independent stage occurs in something called the stroma. Now, if you closely refer back to my diagram, there's no stroma. I have not mentioned the stroma. What exactly is the stroma? Whenever you hear the word stroma, I want you to think of cytoplasm. Now, don't confuse it with cytoplasm, but whenever you hear the word stroma, I want you to just think of cytoplasm. Now, if you took this as a cell, we have the cell membranes, and this would be the cytoplasm. So that is exactly the stroma. It's basically like the cytoplasm, but this can't possibly be the cytoplasm. No. So if it was going to be a cytoplasm, this would be a cytoplasm. So that's our cell, that's the nucleus, and that is the cytoplasm, and there you have the chloroplast. That's the analogy. No. Inside the chloroplast, you can't possibly have a cytoplasm. No. That's why we have the stroma. We call that region the stroma. It's like a small, like aqueous fluid, if I might. It's just a fluid, actually, a small fluid. And this occurs in the stroma. And now, it's not really good to talk about photosynthesis without its equation. So I'm just going to write down the chemical equation for photosynthesis down here. Now, we're not dealing with word equations, obviously. We're talking about the chemical equations. So carbon dioxide plus water is going to give you glucose, C6H12O6, and you will also be producing oxygen. If you try to count and balance, it's 6, like so. And then I'm gonna group them like this. So the water along with the oxygen gets its own group, and the glucose along with the carbon dioxide gets its own group. For what and how? Here's the deal. Carbon dioxide and glucose, so if I talk about carbon dioxide and glucose, they are utilized and produced in the light independent stage. Like I said, you don't have to take this too much into your mind. This will come in handy later. I will be elaborating on this later. Just so you know, these things are related to the light independent stage, while these things, the water and the oxygen, are part of the light dependent stage. Part of the light dependent stage, and that is the 13.1 segment, chloroplast structure.